Great. Arabella, would you do me a big favor and just speak so I make sure our speaker is working?
I'm speaking. Good evening, everyone.
Battery 80%.
Okay, go ahead. Can you say something again, Arabella?
Yes, Carol, I can say something. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
There we go. Okay.
Again?
Thank you. Hi, Linda. Welcome, Linda.
Hi.
So great to see everyone. On this beautiful summer evening. I chose the topic of thinking about the spiritual path as one goes through the various stages of life. Because things shift, and it's interesting to ponder the way that the transition from one stage of life to another stage of life begins to shift your perspective and your quest for spiritual fulfillment and wisdom, coming into greater awareness of who you are, which sort of harks back to our previous topics of who am I, where am I going, and why am I here, and so forth. But the answers change as you get older. And so not everyone here is in the same stage of life, but most of us will experience all of them. And so where you are now is actually just a preparation for where you will be later. So it's fascinating, I think, to look at the overall process. In the Indian tradition, there are considered to be 4 ashramas of life. The first is the life of being a student, brahmachari. The second stage of life is being a householder, where you live with the family of your home, and you raise children, and you work in the world and accomplish things. And then there's a stage of life where you withdraw from that. Children are grown up, and you have it's called a hermitage stage, where you have a chance to step back and reflect on your life and to be available to guide or consult with the younger people as they struggle with their life challenges. And that, that might be from the age of 50 or so. And then later, if you're still around and you're still pursuing your spiritual path, you move into what is called Sannyasa, which is a renunciation of the world and a thorough removal of yourself from life responsibilities and connections, so that you really delve into your spiritual quest and prepare yourself for leaving this plane and going into another. And so that usually happens around, I mean, traditionally, I was reading about this, and I think it goes back to 500 BC. This tradition, this kind of understanding of the stages of life in the Indic world. So in our world, in the West, there's an absence of that sort of stage consciousness. Rather, we think of ourselves as being at our peak when we're maybe in our 20s and 30s. And then we sort of consider, and when I say we, this is a great generalization, right? Because different people think very differently. But there is a kind of feeling that as you get older, you're losing what you had, you're deteriorating, you're moving into a period of less awareness, or maybe dementia, or not very appealing thing to look forward to. Though some of our psychologists, like Erik Erikson, some of you may have studied when you were in college. I don't know whether they do that anymore, but his stages of life included a stage after 65, which is a psychological developmental stage after 65, which was about acquiring wisdom and understanding. And he was noted for that, as that was kind of a novel innovation, really, to think of it that way. Of course, in many traditional cultures, that was already present, because elders were respected as having sort of a realm of mastery of their own, that they had lived through a lot, and so they had an understanding that young people didn't. But in our modern or postmodern Western culture, Western society, I should say, that is much less appreciated, so that there is less of a role for elders, and elders are sort of shuffled off to a special place where they associate with each other, and kind of wait till the end, sit in a rocking chair, just kind of pass the time. And so, all of these things are changing all the time, especially in the West. In more tradition-bound societies, they are a bit more stable, and some of these roles haven't changed that much in a long time. So anyway, we're all here to reflect on today on this sequence of stages of life, and how that interfaces with our spiritual path. So I see people of different ages, and so I'm curious about what different people think about this process, and how you see it, and what you think it's going to be like for you, or is like for you at this point, and what you would like for it to be. So anyone who has perspectives to share, or questions to offer to the group, that would be helpful. So if you'd like to throw something in the pot, just as Carol said, unmute yourself and say your name, and then let's hear what you have to say. Yes, Arabella.
So I have a curiosity. What I'm finding is a number of significantly older students are. Can you hear? Rob?
Yes, yes, a little, speak as loud as you can.
Okay, I'm finding that a significant number of older students are beginning their path now in their 60s and 70s, a couple even older than that. And they all almost uniformly come in with a fear that they've wasted their life up until now, that they haven't been doing their work up until now because they've just discovered Tantra. And I'm curious what other people who are in this circle think about that and how they feel about beginning their process if they've begun it later in life.
Yeah.
So that's my curiosity.
Yes, great. I too would like to hear what people think about that. Yeah.
So this is Ellen, and I would definitely like to speak to that. Can you hear me? Am I?
Yeah.
Okay, good. As someone who started her spiritual journey in my 50s, right, in my early to mid 50s, I resonate with what you were saying, Arabella, and I'm like, why didn't I find this sooner? Like, why didn't I find Tantra sooner? Wishing I had. And there's a piece of me that understands maybe I wasn't supposed to find it sooner, right? Maybe I was supposed to find it when I found it, but I wish I had found it sooner.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting place to be.
May I comment?
Yes, please.
I'm curious as to what about your previous life did you think wasn't about Tantra?
So that's a really good question, Arabella. I think it was, but I didn't have the language for it or the framework for it. And I think it would have been slightly different had I had the framework, had I had the tantric framework way back. But that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but thank you.
Yeah, I think that as I read it, and Shiv, I would be interested to hear what you say about because you're Indian, about the Indian perspective, though I'm sure it's different now than it was, several generations ago. But it seems like the idea that, you do this phase of life where you're busy in the world, and that's the experiment. And then when you get older, you reflect on and analyze the data that you gathered during that period. It sort of takes the pressure off, like, well, no, I wasn't really supposed to do this then. I was doing a different thing then. I was experiencing and dealing with the stresses and challenges and discoveries of life. But now I have the chance to reflect on that and make sense of it, pieces together, and benefit from the experience that I had. So it's not like I should have been doing it sooner, which might be a relief in a way, like, no, I wasn't supposed to be doing that then. I'm supposed to be doing it now. I will be supposed to do it later when the time comes. And right now it's my job to be fully engaged and fully cognizant of what's going on around me and experiencing it with my full attention. But I think in that cultural setting, yes, there is some sense that, well, later I will reflect on this and make sense of it. And that makes it a little different too. I'm not just lost in this experience. I'm doing the lab part now, and later will come the theory, you know. So I don't know. Yeah.
I have a perspective on it. From my standpoint, the way I see it is, as I grew up in India half my life, the early part of my life, and then I came for my studies over here in the US. I think in India, we are prepared for how Swamiji you described in terms of this life, and this is some part of how you reflect on society and how you grow and age. You need to come reflect more on spirituality as you age, and when you are fulfilling your life as a grihastha, which is in your married life, you need to fully be committed to that life. So you don't have the time for spirituality in reality. I feel right now, I'm more prepared over here, given that background, given that basics, what was imparted to me in my young life when I was young. But there are challenges in the society in India right now. And when I see my mother in particular, I mean, she's suffering in some senses by staying alone in India, because she was used to be living in a joint family system. We used to have this joint family system where we had our grandparents, her parents all living together under one roof.
Right.
And then the society is splintered right now, where we all had these ambitions to grow out, make more money, explore the new worlds and whatnot, right? So we are all in different parts of the continents. So I feel it's harder when a person is used to that environment and they've seen how their parents have aged, and for themselves to adapt to this new environment, although they have the basics and the background in terms of this knowledge. If you are placed in an environment where all of a sudden you're isolated, you don't have people around you, your family, it's very difficult to find that spiritual home. I mean, embark on your spiritual journey.
Right. Yeah, so that I think that's true everywhere now. So many social structures have broken down, and so many traditions have been abandoned, and so there's a certain disorientation in many parts of the world, not all parts of the world certainly, but many parts of the world that make it difficult to find a serene sort of steady kind of clear orientation in the midst of it all. And so that makes it especially a challenging subject right now, topic.
I mean, Swamiji, I would really like to hear your view on how a person, as they grow older, you have children who are apart, who are living at different parts, and you don't have that close-knitness as you used to have in the past. How do you still find that grounding in spirituality? I mean, that I think is the true essence, I feel, in some senses of spirituality. Like, how do you do that?
Yes, I think that's a good question. And it's, I think people are struggling with that and trying different things. Like I live in an intentional community where it's certainly multi-generational. Like we have a lot of people who are in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, like myself now. So there's a certain support system there for the sort of living through the later stages of the life process. There's a certain support system, but we also have lots of young people and lots of children. So it's like a large family, but it's not a blood-related family. So there's a little less stability in it. like people can leave and new people come, and that's a little jarring and not quite so steadying as the traditional system was. But by the same token, there's a lot less prejudice and narrow-mindedness about many things, and more openness. So we have the advantage of that. But yeah, it's a lot of people in later years feel isolated and are isolated. And then, that's part of the breakdown of the role of the elder, that elders are not available to most people because they live in an apartment, alone, or they live with 2 or 3 people their age, or they live with a nuclear family, 2 parents and kids. And so the fragmentation of that traditional system is affecting people in ways that I think most don't realize. So there was just a big article last week in the New Yorker about community and intentional communities. And they had the example of a place in Los Angeles where they had just created this housing that could be occupied by people of all ages and races and levels of socioeconomic prosperity and so forth. And they were feeling that it was a very successful thing, that everybody there, though they were all very different from different backgrounds, they all felt like the support of the community was there and that it was very valuable to them. So now they're talking about building more of these around the country. So, it's a very much in transition. It's a very changing scene about how we're going to live, and especially how we live as we get older. So, yeah, I think it is worthwhile to look to the past in a way, as well. What did people do before? And not that we can do exactly that, but what can we do that has some of the character of what came before, some of the benefits without some of the liabilities that people had before. So we have a more clean slate to try new things and see what works. Yeah. Thank you, Sheep. And who else wants to chime in and help share with us your thoughts about this issue?
Hello, it's George.
Yes.
So I'm going to echo some of what I was hearing Ellen say, in that I feel like there were an awful lot of opportunities for connection and having spiritual discussions that sort of were there, but I was too oblivious to the opportunity for a couple of decades. It's really with the work with Shalom Mountain and coming to Tantra that I've been open to able to have some of those spiritual discussions when I find people who are willing to engage. But perhaps that's all part of the experiment too, or the groundwork.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, I think that there are examples of people like my teacher who began that quest at the age of 5 years old or something. I mean, so the idea of these stages of life has always been somewhat flexible. And some people started really early in life. but they were kind of the exception rather than the rule. And that, you know, in the Indic perspective, well, probably they had done some of the other things in another lifetime. Now they were ready for more of this. So we don't have usually, most people in the West don't think in terms of multiple lifetimes, though that's becoming more common, actually. But that's part of the equation too, because if I've done something else in the last lifetime, then I'm ready for maybe more spiritual exploration. And or maybe I did a lot of that in the past. Now I'm ready for just being a person and living in the world and getting that experience. So, you know, a lifetime becomes like, has its own purpose, but you don't have to do everything in one lifetime, you know. So that, again, that sort of takes some of the pressure off and feels a little more, a little more roomier, you know, like where there's more room for relaxing and being who I am and learning from that. And, you know, what I need later will come later, and I don't have to worry about it. And Linda, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so I'm kind of going back to the question you asked earlier, Rudyji, about, you know, what do we think about our own lives? And I had really two things I'd like to share. One was that I can't remember my family. I have a daughter who's about 52 and of 16 and 18-year-old grandchildren. And we were talking something about, you know, someone's needing to go to assisted living. And they all looked at me and they said, "You'll never go there." They call me Dobby. "Dobby, you'll be in India on some, you know, raft trip and you'll tip over and hit your head and that's it." And I was kind of like, I thought, was that the good news, the bad news, the news? I don't know, but it was interesting to hear their perception of what they expect. But I don't know if that's really the truth, if that was what will happen. But I had an experience when I was doing this network chiropractic that I know you love as well as I do. And I was on the table, and I have no idea how it all works, but suddenly I started to have this immense, warm feeling of love. And, you know, kind of literally came out of nowhere. And so I was kind of staying with that. And then I thought, oh my gosh, this is probably what happens when you die. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm dying. And then I had this very funny thought that, oh my gosh, my car is here. How will they get my car home? You know? And then I thought, Linda, don't worry about that. But I don't know how long it lasted, but it was, then I realized, oh, I guess I'm not dying. But it was a very interesting experience. When I talked to my practitioner, I told him, and he said, oh, it's good to practice dying. He was very cavalier about it. I mean, I thought I was going to go like, oh my gosh, you know, I just had this experience. But, and that was, that has me thinking some more about, oh, okay, so dying, and, you know, this whole idea of dying every day or little pieces. And so I guess this is all kind of mixed up, but these are thoughts that I've been having, and something about thinking about, okay, I went to a psychic reader a long time ago, and she said I would live till 93 or 94, and I've been thinking, well, maybe that's about right. So I'm also thinking that there's some, okay, I'm practicing dying now, that's good, or I do every day, or but there's something about having some kind of consciousness about it. Like,
Mm.
you know, can I get to the place where I can just decide this is it? You know, that I'm on to other places, or so that's kind of all my mixed up thinking about my own death.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Yeah. Well, those are all fascinating thoughts, and you know, but I notice in the mix of all that there's this certainly this issue about fear, you know, and I didn't hear much in the way of fear about death, and it strikes me that some of the traditional structures of support, family and belief systems and so forth, offer a kind of freedom from fear, because if you are moving into later stages of life and you're falling into fear, then that really limits your ability to take advantage of that stage of life and the reflection on it all and the freedom to move into the next phase. So yeah, I think that deserves mention in this discussion, that you want to try to avoid the fear position, so that, you know, the keynote in Tantra, well, they say Tantra is about sex and death, and it's also based on, it's all about play. So we need to be playful about death. We need to be playful about the whole stages, all the stages. Well, no, they're not leading to some ominous kind of horrible end. They're actually just different ways of playing along the path. And there are different opportunities along the path for different kinds of spiritual insights and discoveries, according to, and each one offers some specific opportunities. You know, like being in the midst of a family, raising a family, and so forth. You get, you learn a lot, and it's very informative and has an amazing gifts to convey in terms of awareness and understanding what life is about. But that's true of later stages as well. So if we can remain in a place of playfulness and experimentation and discovery, then we are actually on the spiritual path, because that's what the spiritual path is about, is discovery and awareness and the wisdom inherent in that, in those discoveries. You know, the wisdom comes after, along with those discoveries, or as a result of those discoveries, and that those explorations. So if we slip off of the playfulness position, you know, we lose our sense of playfulness and discovery and curiosity, then whichever life stage we're in is likely to become a stagnation in our spiritual path. So, you know, trying to arrange the practicality of all of that is also challenging. You know, how do I set up my life, and what things do I need to be able to maintain that equanimity, that sense of curiosity and play, and who will support me in that, and how do I do that? And those are all very thorny and practical questions that we have a chance to address for ourselves individually, but also to address in a collective sense, like what as a collective, we as a community or a state or a country, what do we want to do to make this possible for us and others to follow our spiritual path throughout our life in all these different stages. And I don't think in social engineering or city planning or all the things we do that we think are really being sensible and forward-looking, that we think much about how we're providing for this moving along the spiritual path. That doesn't seem to enter into the conventional discussion about these issues, but I think it should. And I think that, to me, that's the measurement of a culture, that a society who does make plans for that is actually a culture, because it's culturing, it's cultivating and culturing awareness and transformation, repeated transformations and spiritual fulfillment. And a society that doesn't do those things isn't. I try to refrain from calling that a culture and just call it a society. People are connected with each other and they're carrying on commerce, or they're doing whatever they're doing, but the cultural aspect is missing. And I take that from my teacher, who said, the problem with American culture is that we don't have one, and that's a serious problem. But I think there's truth in that, because we aren't cultivating the spirituality. So these issues that we're talking about are all part of that challenge, and how we as a collective, as this group on the screen, or as this country, or whatever level of collective you want to think about, how we can provide what's needed for people to, at each stage of life, to make that a priority, rather than, well, how many bedrooms are you going to have? Or, how many automobiles should you have at your command, or any of those things. So we can do something about that. We can think in those terms and help others think in those terms. So, yeah. But thank you, and Linda, for launching that train of thought. Yes.
My name is Sean. I'm very, very, very new to Tantra. And I think I'm possibly the youngest person here tonight. I'm 33, and I've done a lot with my life. And I feel like in the society that we are in right now, the ideas of people trying to find the spiritual path younger leads to a harder life in the physical plane. And I feel like that seems to be what is happening with the younger generations right now, is that there's more of a shift to look at the physical, or less of a shift to look at the physical and more of a shift to look at what is spiritual. But then how do we live in a material world? And that's a big fallout between what is societally correct and what is spiritually correct. And I keep on finding a problematic viewpoint between those two things. And it could just be me, but I feel like there's more people like me out there.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, that there is it's not congruity between those two concerns. What is right for the spiritual life, and then what is right in terms of the way the world is working. Those seem to be not harmonized. And I think that's at the root of a lot of our problems. Yeah. So, you know, it's up to us to harmonize it. You know, it's up to us to figure out how to give more emphasis to the spiritual aspects of life and how to create the other life, how to reshape it so that it does support and they do fit together, does support the spiritual unfoldment over a lifetime. And you know, if we can keep that intention alive, and then in small ways we each find ways to help make that happen, then you know, things will change. But it's I don't know. I was bringing up with people I was with the last few days. I was bringing up the question of pop culture, you know, and I was saying, well, no, it's not a culture, you know, but it's actually observing what you're talking about, that the way the world is working and what people talk about and where they put their energy is way off in a different realm from what we're talking about here in terms of following a spiritual path. And it's as though they're two different universes. And so it keeps people occupied, and they're busy doing Facebook, and they're busy doing this, and they're reading about what this movie star did or that rocks, you know, that well, my language is all antiquated now. But anyway, what the popular figures are and what they're doing, and on Twitter or whatever. And how is that informing the spiritual path, you know? Well, it probably isn't. So if you're immersed in that, then, you know, you may feel somewhat ungrounded, or you may feel a little like, is this all there is that we're doing here? You know, and that's good, because you then say, well, I have to look a little deeper for something else. But it is, you know, we all have to take credit or blame for the creation of this world we live in. And if it doesn't work for us, we need to change it. We need to recreate it in a different image. And that's a huge thing to say, you know, like, oh my God, how do I do that? But, well, we each do that in small ways, and collectively, that's a big way. You know, I mean, that's it has an impact if enough people do it. So yeah, thank you for that. Those comments. That's helpful. Yes, Matt. How are you?
I'm well. Hi from Hawaii, everyone. My name is Matt. And Swami Ravi, I've loved watching my own conversation for my spirituality in early life, middle life, the third stage that I'm at right now, I would say. I'm curious, though, maybe in any comments or reflections that you may have about when you do meet people who are just beginning those questions, if it doesn't matter their age, of a spiritual path. How do you approach it? Or is there any sort of tools or ways to, you know, in a kind way, sort of, you know, say, well, then there's Tantra, you know, and here's this thing that, you know, you may want to consider. Anything would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think when you say that, my impulse is to comment that I usually try to find out how they're thinking about it, you know, like, and really see where they are, because very often people are, you know, nibbling around the edges of what we call Tantra already in some fashion that they hadn't thought of hadn't realized could lead them into what we call Tantra. And so we want to work with them where they are, and with what they're curious about or interested in. And if they say all roads lead to Rome. I mean, if you really follow with them where they are and what their curiosity is, that eventually it will lead them into a kind of tantric process. But we have to. The tricky part is we have to enter their reality, and often that's not a very pleasant place to be, which is one of the reasons they're looking for something else. So if we can find our way into standing with them where they stand and listen to the questions they have, we can kind of insert a few little tips that will take them more and more toward what we have to offer that might be useful for them. Yeah, I hope that helps a little. Thank you. That's an important question, because we're talking about how can we help change things. We can help change things by helping people find their way, the people that are around us, helping them find their way. And then we're practicing what we preach, So that's great. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. George.
So it feels slightly off topic, but and so maybe a topic for another satsang. I wondered what you think of the role of art and music are in people's spiritual path.
Yes. Well, music, dance, which is this space 24 hours ago was full of people dancing. And, we live at Dancing Shiva. So music and dance and dance is an art as well. And all these approaches are our way of finding our synergy with spanda, with spontaneity, which is coming from a deep place within us. And that's our clue to the spiritual path, really. So I think it has a very prominent place. And it's so helpful, art and music and dance and so forth are really helpful getting us out of the sort of stuck mental places that we get, where we're kind of locked into sort of kind of cycles of thinking that just repeat themselves, and we feel kind of frustrated. And so that's when it's time for music, it's time for dance, it's time to step out of that mental world into a fuller expression of who we are. And dance is Shiva is all about dance, and we are dancing Shiva. So we were dancing this being the occasion yesterday for a celebration of my 80 years on the planet. And it was great to be dancing and celebrating with everybody. Very refreshing. So yes, more art, music, dance, and spontaneity. Allowing, and that's not an easy thing. It's not like just, I'm going to be spontaneous now. well, then we have ideas about what spontaneous means. So we're not really being spontaneous. We're trying to follow our ideas of what we think it is. So tapping that that spanda within us is a major part of the life experience that we want to be able to reflect on and gather data from. And so forth. Yes, that's beautiful. A great way to pull it together here. Thank you, George, for that. Anybody else have anything they want to add to the plot before we? Yeah, Carol.
I'm curious how your practice has changed as you've aged.
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. How has my spiritual practice changed? Yeah, well, a lot more meditation. And I mean, I can think back about 40, 50 years when I was meditating, but not every day. And for pretty short periods of time. I was busy, you know, and that's okay. That was what I was doing then. But over the years, meditation has become more and more stable and steady, and meditation is longer and more delightful and more something to look forward to. And so that's certainly been one of the ways that my spiritual practices have changed. I think also one of the beauties of getting older is that, you know, you don't feel like there's so much at stake, you know, because, oh, I've done all that, you know, and now I can just, you know, nothing is at stake because I've done my life, you know, and now I'm reflecting on it. I'm more of a spectator and less a participant out on the field. And in a way, that's not true at all because I'm still very much alive and involved. But there's a kind of serenity of being able to watch and, you know, observe what people are doing in the world and gather data that way and be connected. So sometimes I think, well, you know, I guess it's partly being positioned for, you know, 50 years, but I get busy listening to people and understanding where they are and kind of being attentive and to the point that sometimes in social situations, which I'm not all that fond of for the most part, you know, I'm doing that, watching people and listening and trying to understand, and it's fascinating. And then someone says something to me and I look around like, oh, who? Me? Oh yeah, I'm here. But I forget that. And so I think sometimes when I actually leave my body, it'll be because I'm so engrossed in watching and understanding what's happening that I forget that I'm here. And I guess everybody else forgets too, and then I'm not. But I'm still here because I'm so attentive to what's going on. So I can really relate to that. It doesn't seem like a big transition to me. It's just no one saying, what do you think? And I have to go, oh, me? Oh yeah, I'm here. I just leave that part out. And so that has, I think that's part of my spiritual practice, is kind of moving into that position of, yeah, well, I could be here or not be here. How would it be different? You know, just nobody's asking me to talk. Well, that's not bad. So yeah, and you know, even I still do yoga every day, and I really enjoy that. As long as I'm in my body, I really want to be comfortable in it, and so I'm a lot more attentive, actually, to my physical well-being than I was when I was younger, even though I'm less attached to it. So these are the changes of age that I find delightful. You know, I mean, it's like it feels freer you know, and it is freer. You know, I mean, I'm teaching Tantra. Well, I was doing medicine for forever and ever. And when I decided to stop and teach Tantra, some of my old acquaintances said, well, why are you changing horses in midstream? And I said, I already crossed the river. And now I'm over here, I'm doing something different that's really relaxed and free and delightful and playful. And I was so serious about, you know, saving people's lives and doing medicine and all that. And so it seems like a process of liberation, which eventually goes to a different level. Well, now I'm liberating from taking care of a body, you know. So it feels like all of a piece, you know, this progression and how the practices shift and everything shifts and it just keeps shifting and then it goes off to something else. And probably shifts happen there too. I don't know, but I'll find out. If I'm really I, and you know, I might lose interest in totally being an I, and just being part of everything. So, progression along of the spiritual path through the stages of life. I think it's for those of you who are at an earlier stage, it's something to look forward to. Arbella.
Raviji, I realize, eagerly looking forward to sannyasa in my own life. And I know it's not quite time yet, but I can see it on the horizon like a little temptation, you know, like come. And I'm feeling, I'd like to, if I could invite you to tell us a little bit about that stage of your life, how it was when, because when you took the vows of sannyasa, that was not a sudden thing. That was a culmination of stuff. And I'd like to hear about that.
Sure. Well, sannyasa means let it all go. Literally, that's what it means. Just let it all go. And I didn't really understand that, but I knew that it was something about the process that appealed to me, and I always assumed that I wasn't exactly a renunciate at a young age. Though I used to laugh because I wore the kurta pajama a lot, even when I was seeing patients back in the day. But somehow or other, the drawstring in my pajama pants was orange, and I didn't know how that happened, but I thought, well, that's my secret sannyasa waiting to come into view, and that someday I would be able to fully embrace it. And then when I got to be 75, and had a birthday, and then a little bit after that, I thought, oh my God, I thought when I was 75, then I would do sannyasa. And I missed it. And Garo said, oh, you don't have to do it right on your birthday. You can do it a few months later. And I said, oh, that's right. So then I took the plunge with the help of Arjuna and other people. I went through the ceremony. But I didn't realize what a difference it would make. And I didn't realize how much I would be able to really let it all go. By doing the ceremony, something shifted. And I just felt less entangled in the busyness of the world. And it was quite delightful and sort of surprising. And so, you know, ever since that's been 5 years ago. Yeah, isn't that right? So in the last 5 years, certainly a lot has changed in my own way of living and being that involves letting go, letting things go, letting my my sense of who I am go to some extent, you know, and letting possessions go and getting rid of possessions and letting people that before I felt responsible for it, letting them be responsible for themselves. And it's been like a liberation, you know, I mean, and it continues to grow, you know, it continues to become more thorough. And I highly recommend it if you can do it. And I think that's an age appropriate time. I mean, you know, people can do it earlier for sure. But there's something about the natural milestones of developmental living, you know, that at around the age of, not 60s are still kind of involved, you know, you're kind of involved with the world, but 70, 75, it begins to feel like it's time to let go some, you know, just let it go, let it all go, really. I mean, that's the idea. Because traditionally, you know, what you did when you went to Sannyasa at that age is you said goodbye to everybody and took your begging bowl and a loincloth and walked off down the road. And that was it. And, you know, people hoped actually often in India to reach the Himalayas so you could sit on the slopes of the Himalayas and leave your body. You know, that would be, but, you know, it could happen somewhere else. But that was the idea. And, you know, there's a serenity to it and a availability, you know, like, well, I'm available to teach things if I have things to teach them, people who want that. But if nobody wants it, that's okay. And I'm really digesting this huge 50-year-old meal that I have, being human, you know, and that it's a lot of digesting to do. And once you digest it, you know, you derive the energy from it and the vitality. And you know, so you, in some ways, if you follow this path, you're most vital when you're dying, you know, because this vitality of completely shifting and transitioning into this totally other world is like the ultimate expression of aliveness. So there's some things to think about. Yeah, it's all fascinating. I mean, who knew when we signed up for planet Earth that it's going to be like this? I didn't know it. Well, thank you. Thank you all for it. We're over time here, but I appreciate everyone's participation, and it's really just wonderful to hear all the ideas and people's perspectives, and great. Thank you, and I'll turn this over to Carol. She can tell us, predict the future for us, right?
Predict the future, I can do that. So next week, we will be doing a meditation on this very same subject, very same topic. So join us Sunday night next week. Delightful to see some new faces and some faces from times before, and all the people that we see on a weekly basis. So you can unmute and say good night and say thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Right. Thank you.
Everyone.
Night, thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Bye.
Good night.
Bye.